Hi everyone, I hope you guys are all having a great day. Today I'm going to do part 2 of my video taking a closer look at character agency by comparing The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker and Circe by Madeline Miller. So last week I did a video all about character agency where I defined character agency, talk about how this became a topic of interest for me after reading The Silence of the Girls and Circe and seeing various reviews about those two books, and then also the research that I did defining character agency in literature. So you feel free to go and take a look at that video just as an introduction to this one. So character agency is the ability of the characters in a novel to make choices. Can they control their lives in any way whatsoever? Can they make meaningful, purposeful choices that drive the story forward? As I discussed last week, all of fiction is basically about the choices that characters make and the positive or negative results of those choices. And I personally feel very irritated as a reader if I feel like a character has choices but then does nothing. I think it's very irritating when a character does not exercise their agency. I can understand situations in a story where the author has stripped away the character's agency. That makes perfect sense and makes for very good reading. But I get frustrated when characters do nothing and we can see so clearly that they have options, which has led me to do quite a little bit of thinking about The Silence of the Girls and Circe. So I'm going to start by talking about The Silence of the Girls, and then I will talk about Circe in the second part of this video. So for me, The Silence of the Girls, I think, starts with despair. You have Briseis, who is sort of the princess of, or the princess or queen, depending on how you look at it, of a town near Troy. She has been sort of pawned off in marriage to an older man who has a very controlling mother, and yet, despite this adversity, Circe has become a powerful woman in that town. She is well loved. But Achilles comes along with his myrmidons during the Trojan War and attacks Briseis' city, kills all the men, they rape most of the women, they kill some of the women, and then they capture the rest of the women and they take them back to their base camp on the beaches of Troy. So that's how the story starts. To me, that's full of despair, bad stuff, right? Taking a look at character agency in the beginning of the story, we can see that Briseis is a character that has agency. She has chosen to become a powerful woman in her town, even though she's in a bad marriage. She has chosen to show that strength. We don't get a good look at this. It takes like 2 paragraphs for her to become this powerful, well-loved woman in her town, which is a shortfall. Is that a word, shortfall? Shortcoming in Pat Barker's writing, in my opinion. But then, as soon as Achilles' men show up, we can see Briseis making a choice. Okay, so Achilles' men are showing up. They all know that they're going to get raped or murdered, and the responses of the different women are very telling. Some of the women just like fall into a puddle of tears, and they freak out in that way. Some of the women jump off of the tallest towers they can find because they think that death is a better option than the life that they're going to live afterwards. But Briseis, and she knows exactly what's going to happen to her, but she chooses to live anyway. So what we expect from her then is a life in captivity. Now, being taken as a slave immediately would take away your agency because you have to do whatever it is your captors tell you to do. We see that all the time, well, in real life, but also in a narrative, in a story. Okay, the point of that captivity is to strip them of their humanity. These aren't humans anymore. These are slaves. These are things. But because at the beginning of the story, Briseis has chosen to live, as a reader, we expect her to do something. So, what do we expect her to do? Could she try to escape? Possibly. Could she try to have some sort of relationship with Achilles? She probably could try to, given how he is portrayed in the story. Could she try to develop a friendship with Patroclus, who clearly favors her? Yes, she could try that. Could she try and escape later in the story when Priam comes to visit? She could try that. Could she rebel in small ways? Could she show support to some of the other women in the story? She could do all of those things, and she does nothing. She's an absolutely useless character. What a poor choice for a main character if that is how you're going to depict her. She becomes friends with Patroclus and doesn't use that to her advantage at all. She tries to escape. Priam comes to visit, as we know in the story of the Iliad. Priam comes to visit, and he is depicted as a very interesting character. I really liked Pat Barker's depiction of Priam in particular in the story. But as Priam is leaving, Briseis decides to sneak into his cart and be taken out of the city. And then she's like in the clear, but then she backs out of that decision. So we see her about to make a choice. We don't know where this choice is going to lead her, what's going to happen if she is free. What kind of life would she lead? We don't know. That could be a really interesting story. Do we get that story? No, because Briseis climbs back out of the cart and goes right back to Achilles. And Achilles says, "Why didn't you leave, man?" He was going to let her leave. She had every chance to a life of freedom and chose to go right back into captivity. So that's character agency, I guess, but man, is it terrible. I think it's a terrible, terrible choice to go back into captivity. I think that this is especially irritating because Briseis says in the story that a slave will do anything at all, to stop being a thing and become a person again. But does Briseis do anything? No, she doesn't. She can't even manage to stay in the cart long enough to get to some sort of reasonable freedom. She's a useless character in my book. Now, I will say that Pat Barker, I think, did a great job with some of the other female characters. I especially enjoyed a look at what happens in the burial room when the women of Troy are forced to prepare Greek warriors for death, basically. I thought that was really well done and really interesting. I liked the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus and the mythical aspect of that. Super well done, very interesting. I liked Priam. I liked the queen of Troy, Hephzibah, is that her name? She was well written. She was a strong female character. Briseis, my friends, not even a little bit. And this bothers me, again, because at the beginning of the story, Pat Barker tries to convince us that Briseis is a strong woman capable of change, capable of living in a disastrous circumstance, but in the end, she's not. She just goes with the flow, as terrible as that is, which makes a boring story. And I understand that she's dealing with the Iliad myth, and she can only go so far. She is choosing to stay very close to what the Iliad myth actually has to say, but that's her choice, and I think in this case it may be a bad one. Okay, so my overall opinion, if I have not summed it up accurately enough, is that I did not like The Silence of the Girls, and I did not think that Briseis was a character who used her agency well. Now I'm going to take a look at Circe by Madeline Miller. Circe is one of the first witches in Western literature. She comes up in the myth in Homer's Odyssey. She is the daughter, in mythology, she's the daughter of Helios and then a nymph, I think. She is she is descended from the Titans, basically, and that is going to be interesting in her story. She is a witch, and she uses her powers for evil, so she is exiled on an island to live out her life. So the story covers her birth, her family, or her life with her family before she is exiled, how she develops her powers, her evil use of her powers, her exile on the island, and her life from that point forward. It covers so many interesting stories, so many interesting topics. The writing is absolutely beautiful. I'm sure you can tell that I liked Circe much better than The Silence of the Girls. If you haven't actually seen my full review of these for the BookTube prize, you can check it out. I'll put it up in the cards up there. So, however, considering character agency in the story of Circe. Circe doesn't start with much agency. She is a child when we meet her. She doesn't really have any powers like the rest of her family. She doesn't even look like a god like the rest of her family does because of the color of her hair and her voice, which are both different. And she doesn't know that she's a witch. So she's just this young girl sort of putzing about her father's palace. But slowly we see her develop as a character and we see her agency develop. For example, she chooses to go and talk to Prometheus about the humans that he has saved to help him by giving him a little bit of comfort and to ask him why he saved the humans. She goes off by herself and falls in love with a human. And then when she falls in love with him but realizes that he is going to die, she decides to come up with a way to save him. It backfires, which is unfortunate, but as we said, character agency, fiction, it's all about the character choices and the positive or negative outcomes of those choices. So she finds these magical plants, but that because of her powers as a witch, she can use to her own devices. She finds these plants, she turns the man she loves into a god, and that doesn't go well for her. And he ends up being a total jerk because it's Greek mythology and you don't get what you want in Greek mythology. And so this terrible merman god type thing ends up falling in love with some other goddess. So Circe is left all on her own again. And she decides that that young goddess that her love has fallen in love with needs to be taught a lesson. So she goes to those plants again. She sort of casts a spell where her desire is that Scylla would, everybody would be able to see her for the liar that she is. And that is how the Greek monster Scylla is created. Circe creates her. And that is the magic that she is punished for because she uses her magic to harm another god. And then because of sort of family dynamics between the Titans and the Olympians, her father Helios and Zeus decide to exile her to her island. And this is where we meet all of those other characters in Greek mythology. Odysseus, Daedalus, Hermes comes into play, so it's all very interesting. And then, but even when she is trapped on an island, we see her exercising more character agency than Briseis shows in an entire book. Circe learns how to use and develop her powers, which are not easy, and she's doing it all on her own. She comes up with a creative plot to help her sister birth the Minotaur. She comes up with a plot to help Daedalus when he is in charge of taking care of this Minotaur. She fights back against the men who take advantage of her and rape her when they stumble upon her island using her magic, which is why she's sort of touted as this evil witch because of the things that she does to the men who have abused her. When she ends up having a son with Odysseus, and she fears that her son is going to go off and leave her and die because he couldn't possibly, because he's not the warrior that he thinks he is, she leaves her island, which she could get killed for this, or she could certainly be punished profusely for this. She leaves her island, she goes into the ocean, she finds a giant sea monster god, takes his weapon, and gives it to her son so that he can fight the battle that he wants to fight, so that he can defend himself. And finally, we see her agency as at the end of the book, after living out her thousands of years' existence as a god, she chooses to forsake her immortality and become mortal so that she can live out her life as a human being. So we can see her develop this, coming closer and closer to this choice throughout the entire book, and we can see her finally make that choice at the end. So I think that from the beginning of this story to the end of this story, Circe certainly is a character who has agency. Her choices don't always work out for the best, but that's okay because it's a novel. So I'm not really sure how much more I need to elaborate here. I feel like through all of the examples that I've given, we can see that Circe definitely has more character agency than Briseis does in The Silence of the Girls. Circe made choices and took action for better or worse throughout her entire story. We can see the positive effects of her choices and the negative effects of her choices that are just classic Greek mythology. And the story is just so much more compelling to me because of that. Madeline Miller gave Circe a voice in a way that Pat Barker tried and failed to do for Briseis in The Silence of the Girls. I would love to know what you think about these stories, and if you think of any other characters that come to mind with either well-developed character agency or really poor character agency. I would love to know what you think. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great day. Bye.